So for my announcement today, I'm joined by Vince Yermal, who's the head of our HR department, and Vince is integrally involved with contract negotiations with our collective bargaining units, and of course everybody knows Rob Perry. He's my CAO. So if you remember back in my first budget year, we faced almost a $100 million deficit in the city of Albuquerque. And we made a decision at that point in time that instead of doing what other municipalities around the country had done, which was to lay off hundreds of thousands of municipal employees, we ask our employees to stand shoulder to shoulder with the private sector through really one of the most difficult recessions this country has ever seen and save jobs in the city of Albuquerque. And one of the ways we did that with bipartisan support of the city council was to do a cut in pay. It was an average of 2.2% cut. But it was on a floating scale. So some of our employees that made, I think, $30,000 or less didn't take a pay cut at all at that point in time, and some of our more highly paid employees took the largest pay cut. Since then, we've been working diligently to restore pay to our employees, and then in many cases get raises back into the pockets and paychecks of our employees for their families. So we had the pay cut the first budget, and we have had 4 years now in a row, 4 years where we've been able to offer some kind of raise to the valuable employees to the city of Albuquerque. And recently, we've announced that we've been able to reach contract negotiations and get contracts in place with both the police union and the fire union and one of our AFSCME unions. And that's about 66% of our employees at the city of Albuquerque. So we've been successful in being able to do that. However, we've had difficulty getting to contract negotiations. In fact, we've come to impasse with 4 of our AFSCME unions. And these are unions where people really get up in the morning, and I know what this is like because I worked as a construction worker for many years of my life, and I've got steel-toed boots and a hard hat, and I know what it's like to come home with a sore back at the end of the day from working. And we've got folks in our blue-collar, transit, clerical, and security units that haven't seen any of these 4 raises that we've been able to offer over the last couple of years. And quite frankly, I'm tired of waiting. And I want to get this raise that was approved by the city council and signed by me in this year's budget, and I want to get that into the paychecks of our valuable employees. And so today, we're going to impose a raise and for our valuable city employees and their families. And what this will entail is starting on, and I think I've got the date right here, starting on September 26th, so just at the end of this next upcoming pay period, our 2,100 employees will receive basically a $1,500 a year raise. It'll start hitting those paychecks on September 26th. Along with that will be some other provisions that we're imposing that were part of our last and best offer, and these gentlemen can explain to you legally why that's important. We will also be imposing 3 hours per employee to help pay for union time. And this has been one of the areas that we've had an impasse between the administration and these 4 unions.
Per year.
I'm sorry?
Per year? 3 hours per year?
Yeah. Is this issue of union time. And I think this has been one of those issues where we've stood strong as an administration. We don't have any problem with folks being in the unions. We don't have any problem with them doing union business. We simply don't think they should be doing it on the taxpayers' dime. So both with the police and fire unions and with one other AFSCME union, we've been able to negotiate a really simple and good compromise. And that is taking a couple of hours of employee leave each year and putting that into a pool and using that to pay for the union time so the taxpayers don't have to shoulder that burden. To put that in perspective, most of the employees, these 2,100 employees that we're imposing the raise on today, have somewhere between 100 and 160 hours per year of leave time. So we're going to ask them for 3 hours. If you just take a simple calculation, so we're asking them for about $60 in leave time for a $1,500 raise. We think that's a fair deal. But the reason we're having to impose this, of course, is because we haven't been able to get to a negotiated contract with some of the union bosses from these particular unions. Another perspective of this is there's 2,100 employees that will see an approximate $1,500 raise this year. Only 800, less than 40% of those employees are actually currently union members. However, all 2,100 have been stuck without a pay raise for 4 years due to the inability of the unions to come to the table and get to an agreement with the city. So it's a situation where we want to take care of our employees. We've done our very level best to do that. We've come to impasse over and over again, and And I'm just tired of waiting as a mayor. I want to get these folks their raise. And so we had a recent court decision from the Court of Appeals that basically says the expired contracts from these unions are no longer in effect. I'll have the lawyers tell you exactly the right language. But with that in mind, well, we're going to get this raised into our folks' pockets. And I'll be happy to answer questions.
So, under the city ordinance or under the law, the administration has authority to impose its last best final offer.
You want to answer that one? Or you want to answer that
Let me
one?
take a stab at
Yeah,
that, right?
sure.
We have the Labor Management Relations Ordinance in the city, and basically that deals with a procedure that when you get to impasse, Dan, and after impasse, we have the authority to basically impose terms and conditions. And in this case, what's interesting is we're imposing a raise. A lot of times people about imposition, things are imposed on labor that may not be tenable to labor. Here we're imposing a raise.
Well,
That's
we
what
actually,
has to be
yeah,
important.
in our first year, we had to impose the
Yeah,
pay cut
yeah.
because we couldn't get an agreement on that. But we went to the city council, asked them to approve a budget that had the pay cut. Once again, bipartisan support from the city council on that situation. But at the end of the day, we had to impose because we've been unable to get this last piece of these agreements put together with these 4 collective bargaining units. We're going to go ahead the opposite direction. We're going to impose this raise.
Is this a first for your administration?
It is. It is. It's happened in the past. There have been others. I think the Water Authority a couple of years ago actually had to
2010.
impose a raise as well because they couldn't get negotiations completed. So we'll but what I'm most interested in here, I'll let the lawyers do the lawyering, and I'll let the negotiators do the negotiating. But I want our employees to get this raise. I mean, it's been 4 years in a row. And I'll tell you, it breaks my heart when I have the city employee come up to me and say, hey, Mayor, do you think we could actually get a raise one of these days? And when I ask them if they know that for the last 4 years we've had a raise on the table and they haven't had a chance to vote on that and they're shocked by that and they didn't know that, that's part of the rationale for what I'm doing today. And we're just doing what I think is best for our employees because they really are the backbone of the city.
Can you be more specific about which workers are going to be getting?
Right. So there's 4 collective bargaining units, 4 unions here that we've been at impasse. So it's blue collar. Now there'll be blue collar folks at Parks and Rec. There's blue collar folks at Solid Waste. There's blue collar people throughout the city of Albuquerque. So if you see somebody out there wearing a pair of work boots driving around a pickup, they're probably in one of these unions. We have transit. That's our employee of the week today. That's Roger and his folks over at transit. So bus drivers and paratransit drivers. Security employees, of course, security guards and those. And then clerical, the people that work throughout the city, really getting the day-to-day work done from a paperwork standpoint and from a clerical standpoint.
It's about $2.7 million in raises, 3% across the board, all employees that are members of those bargaining units. The appropriation's about $2.7 million.
This gentleman here, do you have? You looked like you were gonna. Oh, right.
Some of the union groups have made an effort to go to the city council meeting recently, and they've asked for arbitration, that they would want to go to arbitration, have an arbitrator pick their offer or your offer. I think why is this a better option than that?
Well, we think that this is the much better option to arbitration is to sit down at the table and work things out. We've been able to work it out with 66% of our employees and their union members. But quite frankly, we've got a couple of folks standing in the way of 2,100 people in their raise. And so we're just going to bypass that. And we think we have the legal right to do that. We know we have the legal right to do that. We have a Court of Appeals opinion that all 3 judges put into place. Mr. Perry can give you a copy of that. We received that on the 9th of September, just a few days ago. And it basically says that the old contracts, there's no evergreen. It's kind of an inside baseball word, but we don't have to go that route anymore. And so now that's part of the rationale. But the other part of the rationale simply is just, it's been a long time since these folks got a raise and they need one. The city council was kind enough to appropriate a nice raise for these folks, and I want it in their paychecks. And I want them to take it home to their families.
What does it do for future negotiations? I mean, can these unions still negotiate a contract?
Sure, absolutely.
And what happens to terms if they've been already given a raise? Does this affect any of that?
Well, my assumption was we build it into future contracts. Sure.
Right.
Yeah.
Are they donating sick leave, vacation leave, or what?
it's vacation leave mostly, Nancy. It's accrued vacation leave. Again, on average, employees get between 100 and 160 hours per year of accrued leave, and this proposal includes a donation of 3 hours per year, or roughly, I think that's about 2.25%.
Yeah.
Does every employee donate the 3 hours, or just the ones who are members of the union?
Just the ones that are members of the union.
And do they have enough union members to? Well, will
Let
they
me
have
give
to
you some
curtail
factoids on that. That'll help you answer that question, Dan, I think. This applies to 2,100 members of those 4 bargaining units. Out of those 2,100 members, there is approximately 825 are members of the union, or roughly 39.2%.
Okay, but it's those 825 who donate the 3 hours of leave.
Yes, sir.
And because of the way the labor laws are written, and I don't know, is it a fair share situation? Is that
No.
what is it?
That's a complicated question.
Yeah, once again, I'll let the lawyers do the lawyer speak. But the fact is, 2,100 employees haven't gotten a raise because leadership for 800 of their less than 40% of their group has been able to get with us and get this thing done, and so that's why we're doing this.
You know, I also want to point out that, you know, we're not at the negotiations table anymore. We're at, you know, an impasse and ultimately an imposition. We are imposing, as the mayor pointed out, our last best final offer, and we gave you and described what the terms of it is. I think if you ask the question, what was their last best final offer, it included that we agreed to a 3-year contract of 3% per year. We give them 3 free taxpayer subsidized union time. We give them back the evergreen clause that the Court of Appeals said was not legally required, and we agreed to binding arbitration. Now, I always understood negotiation to be a quid pro quo, meaning you exchange, you know, this for that type of situations. It struck me as strange that you would go to a union and say, I have 3%, what are you willing to give up? And they said, we're not willing to give up anything. We'll take your 3% if you give up those 4 things. That's a little bit ludicrous for me. It's irrational and it's counterintuitive. It doesn't make sense. And we can't hold up our good employees that 3% raise when those are the sticking points of the term.
Especially when we've had, you know, we've been able to successfully negotiate. It wasn't that difficult. I mean, it took a long time, but it's not that difficult to understand. You know, donate a couple of hours. It takes care of union time. The taxpayers don't have to shoulder that burden. You know, the raise goes into place. So we think it's fair. We think it's reasonable. We think it's the right thing to do.